Hello and welcome back to another video. Today I'm doing my 25.5 support tier list. So if you enjoy content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There were a couple of changes this patch, most notably on the champion side of things. We saw a nerf towards Ashe, Elise, and Poppy. We saw a buff towards Serving, and then two adjustments, well actually just straight up buffs to Staff of Flowing Water and Unflinching. Unflinching's really nice into heavy CC bot lanes, and Staff of Flowing Water doesn't really do a huge amount. It is still one of the weaker support items which you can opt into, relying on very heavy like combo pairings. Like a champion like Nami should really value self-fulfilling water when she's paired alongside an AP champion, but is only going in like 7% of games. I think this item could probably do with a bit more to really push it as like a good option. Right now, yeah, still slightly on the weak side. Unflinching looks like a legitimate rune choice though, especially into lanes like Leona, where you can consistently maintain that uptime on the resistances. It's a good early game rune. It can definitely, have good spots. Let's get into the tier list though. The D tier is going to consist of the same champions. Mel leads us off here. She still underperforms quite heavily across the board. Support is going to be her weakest role long term unless they do some heavy work towards her. But the champion, just not doing too hot in her current state. Malphite and Veigar are pretty gimmicky picks. You only really see Malphite with Yasuo and you only really see Veigar with Ziggs. Both these champions in general have one thing really going for them, and outside of that, their kits just don't really support being played support that much. In Ashe's case, she has been a dominant support before and is one of the harder choices which you can opt into, very much relying on getting very heavy advantages early on to the game and then acting as like an R bot later on. The changes which she received more recently did help her in the support role, but she still underperforms here. Still a pick I'm not really going to recommend, especially for solo queue, where you'll often not be able to consistently get the advantages you really want on the champion. Moving on to the C tier, then we have the likes of Hui, who is not as bad as the D tier options, but the direct nerfs he received a couple patches ago now did affect him. It's lowered his overall damage. It hurts his ability to be as effective as a support option. Obviously, the main thing here was ratio changes, which affect champions which don't want levels as much and supports don't want levels as much, and that is where he gets hit the most. So support Hui definitely not performing as well at the moment, but still has access to a lot of tools which can be quite valuable here. So I don't think he is a terrible pick. I do think he is below average compared to a lot of the other options though. Amumu, if he had a good item, would be a decent support option. Just struggles with his itemization. He's an easy to play champion with lots of hard CC. You can still get value out of this pick. In the case of Silas, it tends to be into very specific pairings or lots of good ultimates which you can steal away and then utilize effectively. This pick outside of those situations tends to underperform, so play it where you feel comfortable playing it. Otherwise, it's not particularly necessary at the moment. The champion did get nerfed a couple patches ago and has definitely suffered a bit just across the board, and it's made him a bit more counter pick reliant. The case of Renata and Blitzcrank, they are probably the weakest of the actual supports on this list. In the case of Renata, she's incredibly oppressive in competitive alongside certain pairings and utilizing the full extent of her kit. Past that, in solo queue, she really does struggle quite a bit. She tends to get paired with champions which just don't really work as well alongside utilizing her passive, her W. She wants to play into compositions where she can utilize her ultimate to effectively do a lot of damage and control a large area. Just isn't that at the moment, and she's definitely struggling a bit more, but you can still definitely make both Renata and Blitzcrank work. In Blitzcrank's case, he is purposely kept weak because he is very frustrating to play against. It's kind of like Morgana, where these champions tend to have one thing which people really latch onto: Morgana's Q, Blitzcrank's Q, and that tends to be a really big frustration point. He is on the weak side at the moment, tends to just not be able to provide as much value as some of the other support champions, outside of obviously consistently landing hook, which can be really impactful in a lot of games. So there is still definitely value to this champion. It's just not, the rest of the kit doesn't really come together as well at the moment. The B tier leads off with Shen. Shen as a champion also has a relatively similar issue as Amumu in the support role, where he just doesn't have great itemization. It's for the same reason Galio and Zac really have issues as supports. Their kits work nicely here and you can make them work, but they don't scale as well with itemization because they don't have great itemization to lean into, which is why a lot of these picks will lean towards the lower end of the B tier. tier. Tahm Kench's case, he's just been over-nerfed for both top and support. This champion's not doing that well generalistically at the moment, but if you can get access to a lot of Heartsteel procs, then you can still find value on this champion. I just don't think it's a pick you should really be looking at playing at the moment, where I have directly said they are just going to keep Tahm Kench weak for a while, whilst he is a bit of a frustration problem. In the case of Teemo, he's a pretty unique pick, which can work into double auto base lanes, where you can utilize the full value of his Q. Teemo is also really valuable for his scaling. I don't think this champion is troll to play as support. He does become a bit more gimmicky the higher up you go, but as like a mid to low elo support, he can be a legitimate option. Just doesn't the kind of like the feeling around Teemo obviously is going to be that he's a troll pick in the support role, so it's just something to be aware of. That is a concern which you will genuinely have to deal with when you are playing this champion. In the case of Pyke, Alistar, these champions work really decently in high elo. Leona is another one around this area, and so is Rakan. All these picks are like pretty good high elo staples. You'll see them in a lot of games, but for average play, they just aren't as maybe consistent, but they don't have as much damage agency. I don't know what I would call it to come down to. They need playmaking, and they need map good macro. That's actually what I'd put it down to. I'd say good macro is the main deciding factor when it comes to these champions. People in mid and low MMR just don't have as good macro, and these champions will suffer from it. In the case of Pyke, he's just harder to play. That's one of the reasons why he's towards the lower end of the B tier. I think if you're very comfortable with Pyke, he can be a really valuable champion, and if you are very good at closing out games early, this champion could even just be perfect for you. But yeah, these champions require really good macro to kind of get the value you want out of them. Nautilus is another one, but the Nautilus got buffed more recently, which is why I'm not really going to pair him with the other ones here. I think this champion still is like a slight tier above in his current state. In the case of Seraphine, she's now a high B tier option. She got buffed this patch, and it was nice. It gives her a bit more damage. She still needs a slight bit more, though, to really jump up to the A tier. In the case of LeBlanc, she kind of like Elise is one of, and Zoe are very kind of just very aggressive gold scaling support. They don't need a huge amount of XP and levels to really provide what they want to do within the game, but if you give them a lot of gold, they can snowball and just do huge amounts of damage. It's why I feel like these picks really I kind of slept on as options, but require a bit more mechanics to really get a lot of value out of them. Case of Swain, he's doing better in support at the moment. He's still has a pretty aggressive fall off in elo wise, and he still wants to be played into specific team compositions, but if you find the right game, Swain can be a really good option, especially with the buffs he received more recently. Morgana and Brand are primarily just locked to low elo. These picks do not perform that well in Diamond Plus, but if you are very comfortable consistently landing your skill shots, they can output large amounts of damage with little to no counterplay when you land your CC. If obviously you consistently miss your CC, then your W on both these champions just won't output the damage which you really need it to. But yeah, low elo picks, if you can get a lot of gold on these champions, they can carry games with pretty limited skill expression on them. In the case of Yuumi, she sits towards the high end of the beta at the moment. She's not a troll pick anymore. She can legitimately be played with certain pairings, which can make use of her kit. The likes of Lucian and Tristana are kind of hidden ones. Obviously, Zeri is a more traditional standard one, but in general, the pick is just doing a lot better at the moment and is deserving of a B tier spot. Sona. So I'm going to drop Sona down to the B tier. I think Sona in general is just not doing as well at the moment. This champion has issues. It's almost too fair, as a pick. But the champion has, obviously, no hard CC until 6. She's very squishy. She takes a bit of time to really come online. I think she's a high B tier pick. I don't suddenly think this is an aggressive swing from A to B. But I think in general, the champion just isn't providing enough at the moment and doesn't actually scale as insanely hard as a lot of people believe it to. It actually spikes really aggressively on that full stack crescendo, and then falls off after that point, as she's just very vulnerable. Into certain team compositions, she will scale infinitely, but not infinitely, but scale incredibly well. But yeah, you got to pick the champion in the right spots. If you just troll pick Sona, or you're just one tricking Sona, she will be bad in a lot of games. That is one of the concerns of the champion at the moment. At least it's going to drop down to the lower part of the A tier. They took another swing at her, rightfully so. She was overperforming in support and jungle last patch, and they took her down a bit. She's still a decent option in the support role. If anything, still a better support than jungler, but the nerfs were impactful, and she's definitely sitting as more like a low A tier option now. If you're looking for something with a bit more damage and an AD option, Pantheon, still a very solid pick in the support role. He's actually just generally doing better across the board at the moment. Jungle and mid are probably his best 2 roles, but top and support, very viable if you're very comfortable playing him there. In the case of Bard, he's decent. He has access to a lot of damage. The CC can be really powerful. Obviously, the E and the R aren't damage abilities, but if you use them effectively, they can be like really big game changers on this champion. And it's about getting value out of this pick. If you're not comfortable playing it, then you shouldn't play it. If you are comfortable playing it, then he is in a very solid spot at the moment. Nico has found her main role as in support. She is obviously performing relatively well here. Good hard CC, good damage early on to the game. Pretty powerful team fighting ultimate, and her passive is, I think it's under her passive, isn't it? Not her W. Yeah, I think W has something to do with it. Anyway, I digress. Nico, just doing a decent in the support role at the moment. Has like a load of tools which she can really value and like utilize here. Some of the more gimmicky ones which I mention all the time are like your Shakos and your Fiddles. These champions can be incredibly powerful supports. Fiddle has one of the strongest ultimates in the game and has relatively good laning harass. In the case of Shako, he scales incredibly well, and AP Shako is legitimately probably overpowered at the moment, but unpopular compared to AD Shako, where, I mean, that is like the main way you play him in the jungle. If AP Shako was his like only way played within the jungle, it would probably eventually get nerfed. I think this champion with the AP build is incredibly powerful, especially in low elo, where it scales a lot better than compared to high, which usually doesn't get to the point where it's going to be as strong. Zilean, very, very, like, he's always around the high B to A tier mark. I think this champion in the right spots is incredibly powerful, and he's been hardly touched. Like, this champion has had very limited balance changes throughout his entire life cycle. It kind of just goes to testament of like how really realistically like balanced this champion has to an extent been. Obviously, he's also really unpopular, so he has been on the strong side at some points and not been nerfed because of his unpopularity. It's like the same reason why Taric doesn't really get nerfed, but Taric has been nerfed a couple of times in the past. Zilean, yeah, sits as a solid A tier option. If you're comfortable playing Zilean, he's a very solid pick. Maokai's best role is the support role at the moment, especially in solo queue, and he's a really solid option. If you're looking for something relatively easy to play with good engage, I think Maokai is a great pick at the moment. Senna, both the utility build and the enchant build are very solid in the right spots. You're traditionally leaning towards the utility build. AD Senna just doesn't really exist at the moment. It underperforms quite heavily. And yeah, her build traditionally is just going to be the cleaver into like utility with like your RFCs, or your just like your Echoes Moonstone combo. But there's different ways I've seen people play Senna. But yeah, this champion sits a very solid A tier option. Soraka, great enchanter at the moment. Obviously has huge amounts of healing within her kit, and that is the strength of the champion. I'd say she sits as a very solid A tier option. Thresh, I think, is underrated, and as time goes on, people will realize this champion is kind of slept on. Obviously, he's kind of like memed on for being very like very inconsistent, which to an extent is true, but I think this champion with a lot of its recent buffs has definitely found its footing, and I'd say sits as a very solid high-end A tier pick. If you're looking for your damage options, still here, the Lux, the Zerefs, and the Vel'Kozes of the world, these are all still very viable picks at the moment, and very good slot-ins for like if you want to put them into your arsenal of champions. I think Lux tends to want specific pairings to get the most out of her damage, whereas my recommended go-to would probably be Zeref at the moment. But yeah, Lux, Vel'Koz, still very solid options if you are looking for a good damage support. Your counter picks are like your Broms and your Tarics, and to engage, these champions are incredibly powerful. They obviously have really good repel tools and have counter engage, like Brom Ultimate, Taric E being able to utilize that to just like chase someone down. They have decent tools within their kits. They're obviously not as popular, but in the right spots, they are very, very solid champions. Nautilus is bumped up to the A tier. I think Nautilus is overall doing a lot better with the buffs he received. They were relatively small. It was like 15 damage tagged onto his Q at all levels. Was that all levels? Yeah, I think it was all levels. And yeah, I mean, he benefited from it. I think Nautilus in general has really valuable point and click CC combined with, I mean, just good CC chain and relatively solid damage early on to the game. I think he is a pretty solid all-rounded support. The other champions within the A tier consist of Milio. And actually, yeah, just Milio. So Milio is my I didn't put Milio, but I put, well, I took it right in a second. Milio I've put into my A tier alongside Poppy. Actually, I dropped Poppy down from my S tier. In the case of Milio, Milio's kit tends to synergize with specific marksman, which is where you get the real value out of a champion. In the case of Poppy, she got adjusted again this patch, and yeah, I mean, it drops her down from the S to the A tier. She was already close to the A tier. She tends to be really valuable as a counter pick. Blind Poppy just not as good, and that does obviously tag her from like points. Like, you're not gonna want to rate as consistently an S tier champion if they're just not as blindable. Whereas I think a lot of the S tier picks are blindable at the moment. My recommended go-to engage support is Rel. I think Rel is incredibly powerful still, has great CC capabilities, decent damage, and isn't as clunky as she was before. Obviously, her ultimate is incredibly powerful if you pair it with the rest of her kit. I just think in general she is a really, really solid go-to support at the moment. Zyra could honestly be dropped down to the A tier. I always consider it as an option, but I still think she is an incredibly powerful damage option, especially in mid and low MMR. I don't think she scales into high MMR nearly as well as some of the other options, but is very powerful for the bracket which I'm kind of recommending these champions to. The other picks here are the likes of Janna and Nami, Karma, Lulu. I think in the case of Janna, she tends to want to be primarily just paired with AD champions, which can really utilize the AD steroid from her E and into countering, into engaged champions where she can utilize her counter engage capabilities. Nami can be paired with a huge amount of champions. AP champions work really nicely with her, as her E obviously applies on abilities. Very, very powerful because of that. Lulu can only really play with on-hit marksmen, but is incredibly powerful when paired with those on-hit marksmen. And then Karma is probably the premier pick of the patch. Nami's probably the second highest here, but Karma with the enchanter build really gaining a huge amount of popularity, that being the Moonstone. Is it Echo? I can't remember the full build off the top of my head, considering I just looked at it. I can just look at my second monitor. Moonstone, oh yeah, Mandate, Shrevelia, Redemption, all these are really solid options. I am pretty sure Echoes is really good on her, but just hasn't really picked up as much traction. I mean, that item is relatively slept on at the moment. And then you can wrap up her entire build with a Dawn Core. Obviously, you can still go the Malignance build into lanes where you really want to get quite an aggressive amount of push, and you're not as reliant on just being a shield bot, but her shielding is incredibly powerful at the moment. They are also tagging the non-shielding part of her, which in the next patch, which obviously is going to mean that she is losing 10 damage at all ranks on Q, but her shielding is still the same. She is still going to be relatively similar to what she is current patch, just without as much shove and without as much harass, which, I mean, to an extent is obviously meaningful, so do be aware of that. But Karma, yeah, my recommended pick of the patch. If you're looking for engage, Rail's really good. The damage options are still your Zyras, your Luxes, your Zeros, your Vel'Kozes. The meta hasn't really shifted that much, but yeah, those are my thoughts. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.